program.
How are you? Good. How are you? Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Joe Wingdale.
Oh, yeah, that's what everybody yeah, there's a seat. Oh, Tiffany's
How are you, sir? She does. I've been working hard. No, next year. We're starting in the
She goes with
He's got kids over there. I'm at Howard and Redmond.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Oh, yeah, kind of like I had it morning. Oh my God. I would have passed out. I passed out. I'm gonna steal this chair. Because they had shit on me. I'd have died. I'd have died. It was just a video. On the video. They didn't watch the video.
They saw it?
They're watching it on the back.
These are the voting on accepting the meetings, right? This is for review, right?
This is for review, but all of them are not on that. I fought. Some of them are on. And then I wanted to just not. They was there. Some of them. That's not all the minutes. There are only 3 of them. These are just the ones for review.
We just had the one sheet.
This and this. You already have copies of it?
You need this one? You need to get this? I'll take my pen now. I'll have it right. That's not too bad. Yeah, see, we think it's not too bad. And we're not going to have Ms. Wingate or Ms. Robinson tonight. So.
Yes, now Tiffany's coming to the other meeting.
You said she'd be through
But
that.
she won't be here.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you're ready to get started, Mrs. Robinson will not make the workshop, but she said, due to a commitment, she will be here. She does plan to be here for the executive session. Mr. Wingate has a teaching responsibility at UTC. He does it once a month, and he said he can't miss it once a month twice. So, we're ready to call to order. And if anyone has any questions, if not, we'll get started with district designation with Shannon Davis.
Right. Shannon comes up every year. Every year, there's end of the year kind of designations, and they usually come out around this time. And so it explains your reward schools, priority schools, focus schools, things of that nature. It has changed this year, and so prior to those being released, we want to make sure that everybody understands what those designations are. So we'll turn over to Shannon.
Yep, me again. How about that? So just like you said,
And we're going to talk through what the designations will be. We do know that September 21st is the state board meeting, and that's when they have slated on there to make these approvals. And once those approvals are made, this becomes public information. So that's when it'll be unembargoed at that time. As part of school accountability, there are 4 designations that schools can get this year, 2 of which are state designations and 2 of which are federal designations. And so we're going to talk through each of them, but the state designations are reward schools and priority schools, which feel kind of familiar to us. And then federal designations this year are comprehensive support and improvement schools, or CSI schools is what they're doing. And then additional targeted support and intervention, or ATSI schools. So those are kind of the 4 buckets or categories that our schools are, will be looking at having some kind of designation. If you don't, there's also like a no category, right? So it's not like schools fall into one of these. It's also possible that they just don't get any of those designations and have no designation. So let's talk about the state designations a little bit. Reward schools. When we're talking about reward schools, these are schools that are improving in terms of achievement and growth for all students and subgroups. So we've done a lot of work with our schools to see this new school methodology, new school accountability piece. A big piece of reward schools that changed is the overall reward designation will be deemed by if they got a 3 or higher on the new methodology. And so new methodology means that the schools will get an overall point, and if that point is 3 or higher out of a scale of 4, then they'd be a reward school. And there's no cap on the amount of reward schools. You can have as many reward schools as score a 3 or higher.
Just to put a pin in that, this is different than the TVOS in isolation. TVOS is a component of it, but it's different than just a value added in isolation. So this is separate than the 1 to 5 scale that we've
Right.
been accustomed to.
Right. And so they'll be looking at all students in part of that, and they're looking at each of the subgroups. So that's a little bit new here, is that they're looking at both all students and subgroups there. And then there are exemptions for reward schools where it can't be in the bottom 5% for any particular subgroup and still be a reward school. So some of the main differences in the changes to reward. Last year or in previous years, we had those kind of top 5% rewards where there was either top 5% in the state for achievement or top 5% in the state for growth based on that TVOS index. And so we kind of saw 2 types of reward schools, and there was a cap on that across the state. And again, this year it's quite different for schools as they look at it. It's not driven by these top 5 for growth and top 5 for achievement. It's that overall score, which encompasses achievement, growth, chronic absent, English language proficiency, grad rate, and ready graduate. Right, so it's taking a lot more into account and looking at all students and subgroups. Again, it's any school that scores a 3 or above. And we're not giving grades this year, but that would equate in future years to a school that got an A designation if there were grades associated with it. So priority schools are also still here this year. Priority schools are run every 3 years. This is a year to run them. And these are the schools that are in the bottom 5% in the state, but do not include 17-18 data in that calculation. So this is driven directly, well, it's on the next slide. So there are some safe harbors to this. You can get off of priority schools. So if you have a TVOS score of 4 or 5 for 2 years, you can be removed from that list. Or if your success rate with 2017-18 removes you from that bottom 5%, then they put it in there to help you. So one of the big pieces here that's different for us is there is no 17-18 data in this run because of the state legislation that went through earlier this year in regards to 17-18 testing. And that state legislation said that 17-18 data could not be used in school accountability determinations, which is why they're running the priority list without 17-18 data.
But it can get a school off the bottom?
Can't have an adverse effect.
It can have a positive effect though.
It can have a positive effect if that helps. It could not have any adverse
Right, yeah, I
actions.
understand that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying some of our lower schools, if they do achieve the 3, can come up to reward status?
That's for 2 years.
Well, no,
Or
but
does it have to
they
be
do
2
is
years at it, doesn't it? That's right.
yeah, they have to have a 4 or 5 in TVOS over 2 years.
But would this year count for that?
If it were a 4 or 5.
Yes,
For
okay,
TVOS, yes.
okay, that's what I'm saying, thank you.
Yep, yep. So this list only used 15-16 data if it's applicable and 16-17 data for all schools. So 15, 16, I say if applicable because of that's the year that canceled testing and so many schools don't have data. I'm sorry.
When you go to the next slide, I'll.
Oh, sure. So this then actually matches the cusp list that was generated for us in October of 2017. Right, so we can look at that cusp list that took 16, 17 data to figure out who's in the bottom 5%, and actually it's run kind of very similar since they didn't add 17, 18 into it. So here is that cusp list from October of 17 that shows us, it was sent to us by the state per state law, that tells us all of our schools that may fall in the bottom 10% for that given year. And so what we know is that since 17, 18 is not included, this is going to be data that's very comparable to what comes out. Again, all of this being 16, 17, 15, 16 for very few schools. It's 16, 17 data that's driving that list. So those are state designations this year. Again, we have the 2 federal designations. And the federal designations exist to comply with ESSA in the midst of our state law, right? So by the state law saying 17, 18 data can't be included, federal law says you have to include it, right? And so there's 2 additional designations that have that piece this year. And again, these are to comply with that. However, what the state has told us is there still will be no adverse action based on the 17, 18 data as it is included in these designations. So comprehensive support and improvement schools, or CSI schools, are priority schools plus those in the bottom 5% when using their 17, 18 data. And that are not already priority schools. So this is, again, a federal designation, not a state designation that includes the 17, 18. It has the same exit criteria as the priority schools and the same safe harbors as well. And then these additional targeted support and improvement schools, this is again a federal designation, so it'll use 17, 18 data in these calculations. And these are schools with subgroup issues that have the lowest performance in particular subgroups of students. So you either have an overall school accountability of less than a 1 and rank in the bottom 5% of one accountability subgroup, or you rank in the bottom 5% for 2 or more student groups, which are a little bit looking at race and ethnicity.
ESI, special needs, and whatever.
Correct. Yeah. So just to kind of summarize, I know that's a lot to throw at you guys at the very beginning of a meeting, right? But we do have these potential school designations coming out. The state designations are the ones that we're really looking at for interventions. Those would be reward schools, so anything above a 3, right? And priority schools, the bottom 5%, not including 17, 18 data. And then federal designations are their CSI schools, which are the bottom 5%, including 17, 18 data, and ATSI schools, which are low subgroups. And we can expect those on the 21st of September.
The day of the board meeting?
After.
The day after the board meeting, yeah.
After.
Day after the board meeting.
The actual scores, or this information?
The school designation information.
And remember, it's only those 4 areas, so it'll just be the ones that are reward, priority, CSI, or ATSI. There will be some schools that don't fall in any of those 4 because they just don't have an area, and they're fine, so to speak. They obviously have areas they're working on, but they don't have a designation.
Do you have any thoughts or ideas or projections or
Go back to the cusp
guesses
list.
or what that's gonna look like?
So I think this cusp list tells us a lot. And so remember, for these designations, it takes 15, 16, 16, 17. I think this is the starting point. Candidly, it was a starting point when we started saying, let's look at the opportunity zone. What schools do we involve in the opportunity zone? So when you look, with the exception of Hamilton County High and Sequoia, all of those schools are in the opportunity zone because we had kind of pre-identified from this list that they needed additional, support and focus. Hamilton County High and Sequoia are very unique. They're just a very unique campuses. I've kind of asked Rhonda give a message to let's put our minds around Sequoia a little bit and how we approach, the work there. Then Hamilton County High, to be real honest, it's more of a degree completion program, and so we need to have you all as a board, we need to have a conversation around it. Do we keep it as a school? You know, it's really more of a program than it is a school, and honestly, I kind of feel bad in some ways, because they almost get adverse, they get punished because of, and they do great work over there with kids matriculating and moving through. So it's just a conversation we need to have. I'll point to, also something she said around level 4 and level 5, so when you think about those, you can stay on this slide.
Oh.
When you think about those schools, any of those schools that was a 4 or a 5, you know, there may be some potential that they come off that list. And so, you know, that's just all conversation. But you know, again, without going too far, I think this is evidence that we're focused in the right place. I mean, it's there. It's there. So, and I think we have some schools that have done really well. Go back to the subgroup slide on there. There's really one thing I really want to point out, that ESSA will challenge us. I think it's on federal designations, when you get federal designations. Yeah, so 2 things I'll point out here, and it has funding implications, and it also has just academic achievement implications. Thing 1 is there's a BHN, that's the super sub, right? Black, Hispanic, Native American, they are really pulling apart how subgroups perform. And that's something that, you know, as we talk about closing the opportunity gap and the achievement gaps that have been there, that's something that we will be held accountable to. And so I would suspect, based on 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18, there are some schools where maybe that gap hasn't been closed as much as maybe we would have liked as a system. The other thing is from a funding standpoint, and we'll talk more deeply about this in a work session or something, but Christy, one of the things we're going to have to look at is, because of ESSA, what ESSA is requiring is, as we look at funding, they're really looking really closely at supplanting, and so they're looking at what the general purpose dollars do versus the federal dollars, and actually that get down to their per pupil expenditure piece. In fact, and Kia Shani can correct me if I'm wrong, I think on the report card, it actually is going to, it'll be front facing for each school, not on their hand report cards, but on the state report card for each school, how much the per pupil expenditure was for each and every school.
Yes, that is a federal requirement.
Is that just the general fund?
Just general, they're just looking at GP, correct?
So there won't be
Federal dollars as well?
I'm not sure.
It may actually combine all, I would bet we do not have the final information on that, but I think it's gonna
But
be
that's
all.
coming. That's just something that's coming. So something we'll have to look at as we go forward. So again, those couple of things. Thing 1, that cusp list, I think we're spot on in regards to really honing in around the schools that have, you know, y'all, these schools have struggled for, you know, off and on for 15, 16 years, but we know we've got to dig in and move those schools forward. And then secondly, as far as the implications for the district, you know, and then secondly, as we look at this, the subgroup performance. And so as schools disaggregate the data, we're going to have to take a real close look at how subgroups are performing in comparison and make sure that we're moving, you know, all students.
If I could concur real quickly with what you said about Sequoia and Harrison, about the adult high school. I mean, they meet a great need. A lot of those kids would be failing in other areas. And I sent to the board, I think Dr. Johnson too, an article that came out in the newspaper about the need for more vocational workers, which hits Sequoia right. Exactly. But I think if they go back to traditional school setting, many of them would not graduate. We'd lose our graduation rate too. It would drop tremendously, don't you think?
Yeah, it's gonna be something we just gotta dig
Yeah,
in. I mean, I don't, and it's probably a good field trip prevention for us to take, but the first time I went out to Sequoia last year, I was just blown away at the equipment and the investments the district's made in, you know, manufacturing drill presses, just all the different equipment that's at the fingertip there that we need to figure out how we capitalize on for children. So. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Dr. Johnson. I believe our superintendent knows what he's talking about.
Every now and then.
Yeah, I do. Mrs. Lennon, would you like to take over reviewing September policies for the board, please, ma'am?
Yes.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Shannon. September policies. I know it looks like a daunting task because there are so many September policies, so I think that there are a couple of things that, I guess first of all, I'll ask, has anybody had any time to look at any of the policies or have any questions about any of
are you just gonna go in order?
Well, it's kind of broken up into school board operations, and I think that's kind of where, the ones that we should probably look at, that start with the Scripper Code 1.1. So that's kind of like the ones that we should look at as a board. And then, in that part of it, I think and then the next 1.5 is, more the administration recommendations. Does anybody have any in the, school board, the 1.1 section?
Yes.
Okay.
So some of these, they're not necessarily changes to the policy, but as a new member of the board, I wanna understand if we are following these policies. So line 30 on 1.101, at least annually, the board shall evaluate these above functions and develop goals for the next school year. How do we do that now?
And that was one of the ones I also had, because I don't think we have ever done an evaluation.
In the past, correct me if I'm wrong, those of you, Ronnie, you probably know more than I, we have asked Dr. McDade to review those for us, and if we had specific recommendations, we would do that, but we would ask him to review it to see if we were in compliance.
Evaluating ourselves, is that what you're talking about?
No, it's for,
The
it's,
policies. The
Oh,
policies.
no.
Well,
No,
I think
it's
she's
not
talking about a
the
no, it's
specific.
not.
No, this right here, she's talking about the duties of the Board of Education. So I think my personal observation is that I feel like we do this in our retreat, and I feel like it's probably been most effectively done the last retreat. But I feel like we do this in our retreat to an extent. Now, like I said, previous administration's not as much as we did last year, so I really feel like it was
We did that last year.
most effective last year. But I do believe that we do these in our retreat. Like I said, probably not in
And
the
2 years before that.
but yes.
We did with Tammy the year before,
Right.
and last year.
We did it
I
with our,
agree.
that's what I'm saying, but when I first got to the
That's
board,
the
we
school
didn't
board
do it.
association.
Like, with the first leadership, I'm just being transparent. The first leadership, I didn't feel, my first school board retreat, I didn't feel like we did this. But the following three,
But that's because every time you do them, you do them 4 and 5 years out. I mean, if you do them, redo them every 4, what's you used to making once, you do them in 1 year.
No, that's not.
No.
strategic
No, I'm just
planning.
saying the strategic, when we did the planning before and the evaluations before, they would get them for 3 or 4 years at a time, am I wrong?
We're looking at strategic plans and we're looking at
Yeah.
policies, two different.
So what
That's
we're,
what
yeah, what we're
saying.
looking at is,
So-
do we each
You think about
year
strategic plan.
and
look
one
at our
thing,
legislative and policy
I never got to finish my statement.
Strategic plan, that we evaluate strategic plan, or we follow as we are.
Yeah, that's correct.
Jenny, if
Making
I
a
see what
strategic
you're
plan
saying.
every week, every year.
Jenny, I was listening to you, you're talking about the duties of the Board of Education, the legislative and policy making, appraisal, provisions of financial resources, public relations, and how are we evaluating that? That's what your question is.
Right, and setting
Yes.
goals, and it sounds like from what Chris has said, with
I never got to finish my statement. What I was saying was, I feel like as a whole, collectively together, we do that. We did that in retreat to take the previous 2 years. However, I do feel like there are certain times throughout the year when certain things come up, such as budget or certain policies or certain things that are specific to here, that we address those throughout the year as well.
Right.
That's what I was trying to get out. So it's not to say that we don't do them. What I can tell you is some of this is just like a lot of our policies are general policies based off of what TSBA gives us. So if you take these for face value, you might think we don't do a lot of things because of the way it's set here. But if you actually are like, once you become indelved in it, you'll see, like you'll be able to figure out when and where we do things, but it's not necessarily currently at a specific time for certain things, because some of it we do collectively, like I said, at retreat, or if we have certain work sessions, and then some of it is done throughout the year based on what's going on. Because no, we don't, like budget, we talk about budget in the spring, so we talk about it in strategic planning, but we also talk about it in depth in the spring.
Right.
So yes, we do it collectively in the beginning, what our plan is, and then when it comes back up, we do it there. You get what I'm saying?
And so like legislative, from a legislative standpoint, that's really primarily a once a year, and it hits pretty hot and heavy. When we get to the spring, what about February, March, that whole time they're in session? So we try to bring all the new legislation up and any policy implications it may have, we'll address it then, because once they're out of session, they're out of session. So some of it's cyclic, some of it's, you know, kind of one-time course setting, you know, yeah.
And this Thursday, we go to the regional meeting, well, quite often our lawyers at the School Board Association will tell us what's coming up. They are lobbyists for us with the state legislature, they'll tell us what
We
things
get
are
it in
coming.
district and we get it at TSBA
Right.
convention as well.
Both of those, district and TSBA convention, I believe.
And an email every,
Yeah, and they send it to you in email, so you,
Right.
but we do, we have because we're one of the 4 largest districts in the state of Tennessee, we're considered class. And so we do have an updated district meeting, and then when we go in November, we actually have a separate meeting during TSBA.
Right.
Hamilton, Knox, Metro Nashville, and
Shelby.
Shelby County, we meet separately with our attorneys because they lobby specifically for policies that would affect us as the larger class systems. So that's why I was saying, some of that stuff is, like Dr. John said, it's cyclical, and some of it is at specific times of the year. And
So the answer is,
Yes.
how is this happening now? Is yes, exactly.
well, the budget, we meet every week for a couple of months during budget time, we meet, and
Christie
then we do
lives here,
that.
you know.
And then we had a $400 million budget, and nobody asked any questions, so there you go.
It came out
So-
real well.
One of the questions that I had about 1.101 is number 5, educational planning and evaluation. The board is responsible for establishing educational goals which will guide both the board and the staff in working together or one together. I think we need to kind of maybe clean up the language of some of our policies, because there's language in, there's some typos in here. And also and I asked TSBA today, and I hate it because we haven't done it since I've been on the board, but we do have to find out and go back, and it will cause us to do some homework, which I don't mind that it does that. If you look on we do not have the issue date on some of our policies, on some of the newer ones we do, thanks to Nakia. But we have a descriptor code, but we don't have an issue date on it. And we need to have that issue date on there, but because Sherry has been so diligent and worked so hard at doing the timeline for us, we do have the date that 1.101 was issued, so we have that issue date. So we do have to put that on there according to TSBA. I did talk to them today, and so we do need to put 12/16/04. And then if there are any revisions made to this policy, like for example, that educational planning and evaluation, to me, I don't think we are responsible for establishing educational goals, which is gonna guide the board and staff. I mean, I looked at, for example, Metro Nashville, and their planning is that they don't. That's kind of intense for us to do. I don't think that that's our job as a board to improve the educational program. It's that we're responsible for providing the ongoing evaluation of the school program against the goals and objectives set forth by the board and by the State Board of Education. I think that kind of warrants a little bit of discussion. That's just me personally. I don't think that's I think yes, the legislative and policy making, public relations, but I think that one's a bit wordy. So if we're gonna be doing some changes, that one might need to be changed. And the educational planning for Metro Nashville just says the board shall require reliable information from responsible sources which will enable it and the staff to work toward the continuous improvement of the educational program, which to me sounds a little bit more supportive of what we do, instead of that. I don't think we're establishing goals for what you all are doing. That's just what my take was on. I don't know if anybody else has any.
Future Ready 2023 policy.
It outlines, specific, and that's based on the work the board did in 15, 16, 17, and it's built off of that. And within accelerated student achievement, we speak to the standards and the specific goals and stuff. We speak to aligned assessment. We speak to closing an opportunity gap, and we speak to a missing an area. We speak within there, and then for each one, there's key performance indicators. So what we tried to do was to set, this is where we are, this is where we need to go next year, this is where we need to go the next year. And here, y'all, we want to be accountable. We're a public entity, we should be accountable. And now, with this caveat, if we don't meet the goal, Rhonda's gonna be the first to tell me. But if we don't meet the goal, sometimes we won't meet the goal. I'm just gonna tell you,
Right.
sometimes we will not meet the goal, but it's our obligation to come to you and say, we didn't meet this goal, board, but here's the plan, right? We should never fail to meet a goal and not have a plan, or a target, I should say. That's more so than the goal, because we may be carrying out the steps, but we may miss the target, you know? And so that just kind of depends on where we are. Like, for instance, this year, across the state, generally speaking, from the standpoint of test scores, everybody went backwards. Everybody, you know? And so, okay, so let's talk about what, one, happened across the state, what happened to our system. Did we accelerate at a little bit quicker pace in some areas of the state? Yeah, we did. So, you know, those are the kind of conversations you have, and it's outlined really in detail, granularly in the Future Ready 2023, which is the board, you know, which is built on what the board established to charge and
Yeah, I mean, I
charge.
think establishing educational goals, I think it is important.
It is.
Yeah.
I agree.
It's part of the whole
And from the School Board Association meetings we've gone to, we are charged to set general goals, and then as Dr. Bryan said, they come up with specific follow-ups to meet those general goals, and we are charged to set general goals. But it's administration's job
Yeah.
to say, it's not our job to micromanage
No, no.
at all. But
It's
yet,
like-
a general goal we are to do.
Yeah, it just seems like we're a little wordy there on
Yeah.
how we're saying, that we're a little wordy on a lot of our stuff, I think, but,
We can give Mr. Bennett to make it less wordy.
yes. Clean it up just a
An
little bit.
attorney, or you kidding?
I'm kidding, Scott.
I know that.
I get a little bit of mirth here.
Make it
so-
4 pages.
A bit of mirth.
Sometimes I'm just your stenographer.
Yeah,
But yes, we do evaluate.
Okay, great. Here's the good news, I think I only have 20 post-its.
Okay. Let's take
19.
one of them off.
19.
We have 19.
But I don't have anything on the next one.
Okay. I don't either.
So this is kind of in keeping with the theme on 03 at
Yep.
the G, at the conclusion of the board's self-evaluation will have goals. So does the board, do we self-evaluate? Do we
I've
have
never
a?
had a self-evaluation since I've been on the board.
We not, I do one to me myself, I do a self-evaluation myself.
conclude the board will develop a series of board goals for the ensuing year.
No.
You talking about 1.103?
Yeah.
Yeah, the board will conduct an annual evaluation of its own operational procedures and they'll,
I'm guilty, I have not done that since I've been on the board.
That's not what I see. I don't see that.
1.103.
It's a top
Yeah, I'm
line.
looking at
It's
it.
a top line.
Oh, I thought you said G.
Yeah.
I was looking at G.
well, G was, yeah, the board would create a series of goals
Inclusion.
that are stated in terms of behavioral change or productivity. I mean, this is tremendous amount of self-reflection.
Yes, it
I'd
is.
be
It's
very
good.
impressed if we did do
Yes,
this.
I think it's a good idea. I had that highlighted too.
Hey, this is called data. It's called data from the state. Are we doing our job? We just saw, are we doing our job in some of these schools? No. I have no way of knowing exactly what goes on in the school. We have to depend on the data and the research and the stuff that the superintendent tells us. That's how we know if we're doing our job, is in the classroom. Because, and the budget, if we're not meeting our budget, or if we're, to me, it's pretty much self-explanatory.
Well, no, I think it is self-explanatory, but I think you're talking maybe about something different. Like this is really about the 9 board members taking a look at how the 9 board members work and do their jobs.
No, we have done
A
that before.
discussion of strengths as well as weaknesses. You know, what are the things that within Hamilton County proper, the board is seen as a shining light for, versus what are things that maybe we collectively would do better. I mean, obviously it's my first meeting.
We did that in recruiting.
Talked
about,
We
did
did that, went around and
Were
recruited.
you not
did
there?
that.
I don't remember doing the board self-evaluation collectively.
Well, we did that down at the
Aquarium.
museum.
No,
Creative Discovery Museum. Yeah, we should.
But I think,
And we've done it before.
and I think what Jenny, you're referring to more like a tool, an actual self-effect, like a
Yes,
process,
it is, yes.
a formalized process and instrument.
It's a pretty clear policy that's in our book, so,
Yes.
I mean, either we have it or we don't, I mean, we can just yank it, right? But, I mean,
Well, we're saying that we've done it. I don't know what clear you want us to make, say, we think we dress nice, or we.
Is it like the superintendent?
I gotta say, is it gonna be an
Yeah,
evaluation
exactly.
like that, and I tell you how I think you're doing, or you tell me who, or I tell you how I think I'm doing?
No, we've done what we did at the meeting, we did a self-expression.
what are we good, we're doing, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Ford,
What are
we said,
some points?
are we doing well here, are we doing well here? And like I said, I think I can do better in this, or Rhonda said, I think we're doing real well in this area, and it's been an informal self-evaluation.
I'll take this moment in time to share what we're doing administratively, and, this team out here is gonna do, we're doing a 360. But taking competencies and keep really spearheading and taking kind of leadership competencies, and then also just some feedback around areas, and share that to the people that report to us, so to speak, and get that feedback, which will require some stuff. But we kind of want to formalize the process as an administrative team, because one of the things that oftentimes happens in large organizations, whether it's a school system or not, is you're not as intentional about evaluating the folks that sit around this table on a day-to-day. And we want to try to be real intentional about, one, getting input from folks. We had a group of about 5 or 6 teachers over there right now that were meeting with our team, giving us feedback on what's going well, what's not going well, how can we improve. So it's more that continuous improvement, learning organization mindset that, I think,
Yeah, we didn't do it as a personal, as each individual board member, we did it, what are we doing well as a board? What do we need to do as a board? Because really, what I do personally is vote me out.
Ms. Rizzo?
So I have a thought. If the thought, or if it's the pleasure of the body to have some type of formal tool, like I said, I know that TSBA allows us to do an individual self-evaluation. So maybe, we could figure out if we want everybody to do that, or take that tool and tweak it for a group effort, and then everybody can complete it based on the group, if that is the pleasure of the body. But I don't think it's a need to maybe reinvent the wheel per se, when there's already a tool out there that probably would address these concerns. Like I say, ultimately your individual self-evaluation is always up to you for your transcript. But I'm just saying there is a tool out there that you probably could tweak.
When you get into telling other board members what they need to do, that's when you're gonna have a problem.
No, I don't think,
As a board, we can do that.
No,
When
I'm
you get
saying-
into individualizing this, it's a
no,
problem.
that's not what I'm
That's not what it's
saying.
about.
What I'm
No,
saying.
that's what I'm saying, as a board, we have done this.
Yes.
Right, but what I'm saying is, if it's the pleasure of the body, and I'm just putting it out there, if it's the pleasure of the body to have a specific tool, just as we have one for the superintendent or whomever, I'm just saying that there is an option that we can look at that would allow us to collectively, like as a group, give the evaluation of our board. Not necessarily what I think Joe or Jenny or Chuck or Rhonda did, but just as a 9-member body, are we meeting these things? That's all I'm saying. And I just was putting that out there as a suggestion, because it does sound like that it is the pleasure of some of the members of the body to have a specific tool. And if that is the
Does
case,
state, the TSBA have a tool that's
I can, I'm
designed
sure,
to do that?
I can
and
ask.
they may have one for the group.
I think we're doing it already, but maybe what I hear you saying is let's just have a tool.
tool.
So let's
Yeah.
find out.
No, wait, what I'm saying is, we have this massive binder full
Yeah.
of policies.
Mhm.
And
It's a
my knowledge
policy.
of policy is that we say this is what we're gonna do, so we're supposed to do it, or somebody can come around and sue us and say, you said you did this. We said that the evaluation will be at a scheduled time with no other items on the agenda and with all board members present. I mean, this is pretty specific.
Yeah.
So,
When was
I'm
that
not
policy
coming here with a
written?
value statement, I'm asking the question, do we
When
follow
was
the
that policy written?
Just a minute.
That was the 12-4,
December of 2000.
Wasn't trying to make a judgment call at all.
But it seems like it's something we can kind of factor into retreat if we have a retreat.
Yeah,
that-
exactly.
It's kind of like what you've been doing.
Exactly.
And one of the things, Tristan, if the board decides on a tool, that's something we can give, you all can take prior to. I can even take, from the standpoint of if the tool is general enough, and it can be quality conversation that's around the construct of a
I
retreat.
mean, maybe the policy needs to be changed so it's not individual and it's the board as a whole, and then we just tie it into a retreat.
Yeah,
When we do our retreat every year.
I agree.
Agree.
You know,
But thank you, I think that I had the same one highlighted as well, because it is, I didn't know it was even policy until, I opened it up and started reading it.
I'm sorry, so I'm trying to follow and take notes. So is this a policy that you all want to revise?
sounds like it.
Yes.
Because as of right now, it is individual self-evaluation, but I think it's
Individual
more.
Not really,
It doesn't
it's
actually
group.
say that.
No, it
does say
doesn't.
shall be a
It
composite
doesn't say
of
individual.
board members'
But it says that,
opinions about the board as a whole.
Yeah, it's not.
So it actually isn't about your individual service, it is about your opinion of the service of the board collectively.
You know, it's not bad if we wanna get an instrument for ourselves, for our own self-use.
Yeah.
You know,
have to do that,
of
though.
self-reflection, but that would be,
But what I'm saying is, we wouldn't have to do that because there's already one you can get, like, I got it in my.
right, that's what I'm saying, we can use that one, I agree with you.
And it could be really good, it could be really powerful practice, so, and I'll tell you, like, we are really digging into trying to become a learning organization that's focused on continuous improvement and really being self-reflective of what's going right and what's going wrong, and I think it'd be powerful for, as we're trying to push it down, to say, hey, our board is even
Right, I agree.
self-reflecting, continuously improving. So, I mean, it helps me carry out the job I'm expecting, because I'm expecting it, of our team, as far as, you know, how we operate.
I'm not trying to cast aspersions on anything here or what we do, but we do have a 6:15, time limit.
I know, and
So,
then we're just, we
Right.
will, there's no way to get through all of this at all, because
Agreed,
we're
agreed.
starting, we have, we'll have to have some more time in September to go through
Right.
this.
So what was the conclusion? Are we gonna revise what?
I think we do need to revise it.
Well,
Is that-
Kathy, if I could, please forgive me, but one of the things that I think this board has done is you've been doing a SWOT analysis, which is really a self-evaluation, but you haven't called it a board evaluation process. But every year, as long as I've been here, we've done a pretty in-depth SWOT, which was actually, remember, Steve, that was what was the bones of what you were looking for a superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
So it was what the board wants to do, where does the board want to go, and then, so who do we want to get us there? And then last year, I thought Dr. Johnson did probably the best SWOT analysis I've ever seen anyone do in any discipline, and got the board members involved with their individual views. And then you reduce that to a written plan.
But that was for him, this is for the board.
Sure.
So the board members need to do self-evaluations, just like he did his self-evaluation.
So I'm confused though, because
Yes.
this is kinda like community schools and community school model.
What I'm trying to
What, are
suggest
we
is-
doing a board self-evaluation? Or are you saying the board members need to do self-evaluation? That's what I'm saying, that's interchangeable.
Yeah.
Because if you're saying the board is a nine-member body, then yes,
That's
we
what
do.
this says.
And that's what this, I was gonna say, that's what this
this policy
says. If you're saying board members, then you could have been doing that from day one when you swore in, cause you can call TSD.
This is of its operational procedure.
I think you can do it individually around the same competencies, and then it can be averaged, and then we can say, okay, in area X, you know, we said we're 3.2, you know,
Yeah.
and then,
Yeah.
and, you know, if the target's be 5, what's going right, what's going wrong in that area, and how do we close that gap? So I think the competencies have to be the same for the board member, is what's the same tool.
And I'm
So
trying to
maybe
point
we
out,
don't need to
this is
change
easier than I think you think it is. And I think you're doing it, but I think Lucille's point about maybe making it a formalized process is well taken. But it's easy to do.
I agree, I think we are doing it, they're just not a formalized process. So if we're gonna formalize everything, well, we don't all do a raise, we're gonna be working along.
So then at least it sounds like if it's at the retreat, right now, the policy says explicitly the evaluation shall be at a scheduled time. But actually, we just need to say that it will be at the annual
There
retreat.
you go,
Yeah.
there you go, and that fixes it.
Well said.
And then we can have a,
Which is a specific time, but that's not.
yes, yes.
Sounds good to me.
But Russ, I heard you.
Next, post it.
If anybody has any.
Now, I'm going right along with you.
1.105, legislative involvement, again, I'm brand new, so I don't know. I wondered if I could just get an update on the status of how we do that. It sounds like it involves the TSBA and, that we have a Tennessee Legislative Network representative?
We do.
Awesome.
We landed right here.
Kathy is our representative.
And Nakia, you can kind of talk on that maybe a little bit more on how we update the law, how we've been updating the policies.
Yes, so TSBA does a summary, as does the Tennessee Department of Education, of every legislative cycle, the implications for school districts. And so we took that summary this summer, and every place that there was a new law passed or a law updated and it had a policy implication, that was the policy revision that we submitted in July and adopted in August. So we'll continue that annual scrubbing and follow TSBA's guidance and the Tennessee Department of Education.
And so when there's a change of law, then it matches it with that policy, makes those changes, and then we present it to the board and change the policy, do the first reading and the second reading, and then change the policy.
And then this is really more about working for new laws designed to advance the cause of improving education. So are we doing that? Line one, the board will work for the passage of new laws designed to advance the cause of improving education.
We do that. We've wrote resolutions for certain things we did, we fought against. We've, invited board, Senator Gardenhire has been here numerous times to hear our thoughts and our stance on issues that were being presented through the education committee for which he is a part. Representative Favors has come, we've had those
And also,
conversations.
don't forget, we went to Volkswagen and met with all of them.
Yeah, we did. We had there was a big round table. I forgot all about it. But there was a
We
big
have,
round
we have,
table.
we have lobbyists too.
That's
We
fine.
had
Right. And then we
lobbyists.
have class, who is the lobbyist that
Class,
lobbies those things for all, like I said, the four major issues.
And they've been very involved with us, on what we have on transportation, wrong number 4. Our conference called 3 legislators today. You don't have a problem, a parent brought up, so we have been very involved with them.
My next question is on page 2 of 1.107, the Code of Ethics, and I just wondered, do we have a school district ethics committee consisting of?
Do 107?
I think you have that ethics committee, and you need one, because I was taken before the board of ethics once, so I will speak to that. So, if you get 5 members to say, yeah, it's up, you have to go.
Yeah, I guess it's actually in May, so I guess we just have it.
You just have it.
Okay, alright.
I've been there, done that.
Well, Rhonda, I ain't never heard nobody have it, so clearly Rhonda was the only one we haven't had to have that since.
That is all
That's
that
just when Joe and Chip are here, and he's an attorney, so what can you say? But I beat him twice.
Okay, good.
Those are all mine in section 1.
So can I make just one note about section 1? I think, when Sherry was, diligently filling all of these for us to see when the review timeline, there were 2 policies, or she highlighted the policies that didn't actually say what month they would be reviewed in. And so I do think in this section, 106 and 107, we need to update from simply saying review annually to review in September, because it does make sense to just review them with the block of policies. Okay, that they're in. So we'll make that note and update it on a policy document, so there's no.
Just for my reference, and this was my thought, but tell me what you all think on this. As far as, I know on some of them we don't have the original issue date, so that's the date that we're updating them? Is that how we're going with that?
So, so on the new policy documents that I put together, I have the issue date, and then I have the revised date, and then the last box is the rescinded box. So I think that if we don't know the issue date, it's probably most appropriate, and Scott, you tell me not being fraudulent, is to just put the revised date as of this time, because we'd be misrepresenting
I agree.
when it was issued.
I agree.
Well, but on this sheet right here, it has the issue date.
Well, there were some that didn't.
Oh, okay.
And what I did, the issue date is, I think that's when that
These are all
12/16/04, I think is when the whole book was reviewed.
Okay, gotcha.
I think that's why all of those dates are the same. Yeah, I think the whole book was done at that time, and so that's where everything started.
Well, there's some that are
Because
different.
I'm sure well, there's some, but that, I'm sure,
I'm sure that, I'm not sure, but I'm guessing the majority of those may be because of legislation, different things.
I would guess so,
Right,
yes.
I would think so,
Yes,
too.
I would say you're right.
So are we saying we want to use that 12/16 date as the issue issue
Twelve
date,
sixteen oh
or
four.
leave it, cause
If it's blank, I think it's better to leave it blank, because otherwise we would be guessing.
Yeah,
And I just, since it's a record, it's an official record, I'd rather have my guess.
So just put the revised date.
just put the
That's what I would-
revised date.
That would be my preference.
Okay.
Sometimes,
As now issued.
And if we've looked
Right.
at it,
Issue
it
date,
is
but that's
it is the
issued.
current date.
correct.
If we have looked at it, we accept it to this
Yeah,
day.
yeah, sometimes I need to know the dates,
Okay,
and I need to know with some certainty, and I would rather have a blank than something that when we go back and look, it's wrong. Because sometimes when you adopt a policy actually matters in the case.
If we adopt it and we have Nakia put it in, that is the active date
Yes,
of
sir.
that policy,
Yes,
so.
well, I am going to say on the spreadsheet that Sherry created, though, there are no blanks.
I know, there are no blanks.
Anymore on the issue date.
There weren't any on there?
They're all
oh,
filled
okay,
in.
and I think I did that because I think everything was done on that date. Yep, that's right.
That's
So
also-
if we
free
see
to go
12/16/04, that
If-
means that honestly, you didn't, there wasn't a day.
Correct.
If the board secretary thinks.
Well, not
that-
always, some of them did have that date, I think.
So if the board secretary is comfortable with that, I am too.
Okay.
If she can trace it to that adoption date, we're fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
one more question on that then, right, like this one said the duties of the individual member says issued 7/17/08. So if that's going to be updated and we put the new date there, will the, or issued date above that change to 7/17/08?
I would think so.
I have to have it from you to see.
Well, here you go. Like this, and if we update it, will then this date move to here and,
Oh, we're changing the box labels.
Okay, so, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Issue date is the real issue date. That's
Yes.
the upper, right-hand
All
corner.
right.
Right below it that says issued now,
Mhm.
that's changing to revise. And on
So
the
that's
new
gonna
policy,
change,
that
okay.
will say revised.
Okay.
And then the final one that says rescinds now, it will say rescinded.
Right.
And that's the new template that I have.
Okay.
And that makes great sense,
Okay.
because when y'all adopted this back in '04, your policy manual had a bunch of letter codes, it was totally different.
okay.
And so that's why that says rescind, because you were actually replacing an old antique policy. So Nakia's direction is spot on.
Do we have time to do the administration?
I just wanna do one update about the ethics. There was a school board member that did go for the ethics and did go to jail.
That's true.
That's
That's
just
the other
true.
side of the equation.
So,
That's the other side.
yeah, that's all the other side of
Yeah,
it.
but y'all didn't
Just
say
for,
that.
you know,
going to
this
jail.
is for real, but in
So
my
when did
case,
you
it's
get
not.
It wasn't her.
No, that was just because getting the board members can get along.
So I would ask you just to review, these are just recommendations for consideration that we suggest based on what's 1.5 forward. Obviously, 1.1 to 1.4 are heavy board, these are all of it's board, but these are recommendations that we would make based on our review. So if you all would consider those, as well, as you go. And I don't know if Kathy, you wanna look at 1.2 or whatever time will allow.
So Kathy, you, Dr. Johnson, asked both of you, I'm not sure who, we're looking at these for, and reviewing, but we have to have a first reading.
You have to have a first read and a
And
second
this,
read.
and then vote after the second reading.
Correct.
So these are just a workshop to discuss and look at these and see if we have any problems.
That's correct.
And then we have the first reading this in September,
In September, we.
and the second reading,
For the first reading.
no,
Well, unless, so it looks like we're gonna run short on time.
I know.
We were hoping that if we got through these and you agreed, I would make the changes and bring them for first read. But it seems like we're gonna be tight on time, so there might not be time for you all to consider all of these. and
Right.
So it might be that we need to fall back to October for first read.
Are there any ones that you would like us to look at tonight so that we can have a first reading on?
I was thinking visitors to schools.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's an essential, we've made so many changes.
Yeah.
Well, that was so difficult.
Yes, you wanna
Yes,
speak to this?
we have the new, Raptor emergency, management system, visitor management system. And, we wanted to make that change to show that we have that system in place. But in the event that the system doesn't work, we'll resume back to the sign in. But we wanna go on record and say we do have that system. In addition to that, in terms of parents or guardians who are sexual offenders, We wanted to have some language in there so schools would know how to handle those visitors when they enter school. So those are the two major changes.
That's under the handout that you gave us on.
Yes.
1.5.
Are we, I know we're not everywhere with the Raptor system quite yet, are we?
Almost there, we'll have it done probably first, second week of October.
You're talking Vigilon, you're talking the electronic locks and doors. We're talking two different things. A Raptor is a visitor management system.
Yes.
That's a scanning the
Yeah.
ID. That
You don't have that someplace.
Oh, no,
Not yet.
every school.
Where is it not?
No, Raptors every school.
Yeah,
Supposed to
Raptor.
be, yeah.
And if
The
they're not-
electronic lock and
like
doors
us,
in
they
every
don't
school.
scan
So
our
which
ID.
school do you know?
Okay.
Let me know if you know school, they're not using it. That went into effect, we signed that as an emergency
Right, we did
order
that as an emergency,
in the
and then
fall.
you guys approved
In
it.
spring.
In the spring, yeah.
In the spring, Dr. Johnson and I signed it,
Yeah.
and then you guys unanimously
I
approved
remember
it.
that.
But
It went
that's,
everywhere.
well, maybe I'm confused, that's two separate.
Right, two separate
systems.
entities.
So there's one scanning, but where we should be by the first week in October-ish is
All the
that
lock
every
and
school
doors.
has a access control camera lock and door.
Kevin, if you don't mind, I've looked over what Dr. Bradshaw's had, and I would like to see us go ahead right now and follow through on it and have first reading on Thursday. On the the board meeting.
It's like this.
On the visitors. This is the handout that he gave us, and I think that's something that we need to get in place to be in compliance immediately.
Dr. Hollander and
Yes, sir.
Dr. Johnson, as the executive committee, I mean, understand that the two reading system has been something that the board has had in place for its convenience to tweak. But if you, the executive committee, believe that something is clear and it's simple and needs to be done, you have the authority to recommend it be adopted on the first read. Your board policy
We
doesn't.
agree.
Right.
We're in agreement, we, as executive committee, right, we agree that it should be done
Yeah.
on first reading. And we can do that in September. Does anyone have, I'm sorry, Kathy.
So I-
I have a question.
Yeah.
The bold underlined about, that parents or guardians are required to notify school officials of their status in writing. How will they be alerted that they have to do that? Is that just one of the things that if you're on this list, you know that you're supposed to?
Well, if they're a perpetrator, they're supposed to notify any
So
facility
they know
that has a child in it.
That's
They should
legal,
know that.
legal issue in
That's
this county.
anywhere, the church.
You know what, it
They're supposed to
might
notify
not
them.
hurt, it might not hurt to put that on registration forms or something.
Yeah,
what
that's
I
a
was
smart
thinking. It
idea.
might
Yeah,
not hurt
yeah.
to do that, cause
Yeah,
we
they're
don't
supposed to know.
want somebody to please just arrest a parent in front of their child or
Right.
something. It's
Well,
good.
and by the way, I mean, that's what, the Raptor flags them, so this is
Yeah.
part of it, when we get their ID, we're actually, even if they didn't tell us, we're gonna know.
Sirens
They
go
don't have
off.
their ID,
Yeah.
but the system identifies.
The picture flashes up on the screen.
But
Yeah.
I think what Rhonda said makes sense though.
We can
If
add
they
to the
put, if
registration.
we add that on the registration, then that would forewarn them and not embarrass the child.
The picture do show.
You know, they would be forewarned.
Is that possible on the online
We
registration?
can put a note, I mean,
Well, yeah,
we can put a note in there somewhere that lets them know if you're a sex offender.
You need to
Yeah.
contact the school, maybe you don't have to write it out, just contact
Is
the
there
school,
another
contact the
policy
principal.
that we would like to look at as well?
So a lot of these are minor changes. I'm trying to look through here at,
They align with my principles.
let's talk about 1.8 maybe.
School calendar?
Yeah, it's just a lot of these are just kind of cleanup kind of things based on time. If you look at line 17, line 1, and line 20, you want to talk a little about the revisions there. So essentially, how we have it written, it's not explicit that right after the board vote, it becomes public, you know, and so that's just making it explicit in regarding that. Because we moved to trying to do 2 years ahead on the calendar, we just want to try to make that explicit. So instead of it saying each year at the end of the year, the next year, we're no less than the preceding year's calendar. And then the student attendance days, we just want to clarify that time in excess of approved stockpile days shall be made up to the required minimum. So we use those stockpile days that we have first And so just trying to make those things more explicit within.
And also remember, we had a problem this last year, something was changed on the calendar after we approved it, and then the day was approved, changed. Administrative and service. So we need to be sure that,
It's clear what's supposed to be school-based or
School-based,
Yeah,
school-based
school-based.
versus district.
yeah, just be sure we get all that language.
Right, great. That was a
Problem.
problem last year.
So if we can agree to go ahead with, policy 1.800.
Can I put one more out there that I
Yes.
think we need to do for clarity? All these, I think we do 1.803, tobacco-free schools.
Jules, yes.
We need to include, you wanna talk about that, Ken?
Yes, sir. We had an opportunity to attend a meeting with Chattanooga Hamilton County Health Department earlier this week. And they suggested that we add some language to our policy, one, to add jewels. That's a,
Sorry.
Jules, e-cigarettes.
Vapor.
All kinds of stuff now.
Also, and we wanna specify that we have a tobacco-free campus, instead of certain seating areas, the entire campus is gonna be, tobacco-free, so those are the two major changes.
So teachers are not gonna be able to walk out into the woods 100 yards beyond the schools.
Or in
right?
a car.
Or in
School
or
property.
their
On
car.
school campus.
On school property. If that,
I mean,
if that
I've
forest
never had that
line,
problem, people, but,
if that forest line is outside of the school property, then they're outside of school property, but
they have to sign out.
have to sign.
They have to sign out.
That's a building level.
Signage is going well,
Building level,
ordered,
see.
almost
They
200
expedited.
signs.
I was at a game on Friday and I smelled all kind of smoke.
It's in effect, they just need to enforce it, it's in effect,
Well,
it's already been approved.
Is it fair?
It is in effect.
what I'm saying is, we need them signs, cause it's hard to.
Yeah.
You wanna talk about the sign?
We've already ordered the signs, we've had approximately 200 to 400 signs that will be delivered to the schools, probably before the end of the month, so we will attempt to enforce this.
You better, at football games, you had better have some extra law enforcement to enforce it.
Well, and I was at the same, meeting that Ken was at, and the law enforcement cannot enforce it. It has to come,
From school
From the
officials, we can
council.
tell them not to smoke on campus, but if they choose not to smoke, then we can ask them to leave. If they choose not to leave, then
Then
law
law
enforcement
enforcement
can make them leave.
Correct.
and we were also going to ask them to announce at the football
At the
games.
football
Yes.
games.
That this
Brad
is a-
Jackson
yes.
include that for all February.
Yeah.
And here's the honest truth, it's gonna be a little bit of a process.
It will.
Like,
It'll
we're
be a
not gonna
process.
get in fist fights, move people off the campuses.
Yeah.
You know what I mean, and fight them on that, like, but it's gonna be a process, cause people have been smoking and doing what they wanna do on the campus for years. And so, we talked to administrators, our administrators are very common sense about approaching the adults and, this is a smoke-free campus. 99% of the parents and guardians will respect that, but there's that 1% that's gonna push back, and when we have those situations, just deal with it.
May I throw in a practical consideration here? Most schools have a no pass out for obvious reasons. I mean, you cut destruction out in the parking lots and whatever. We might want to consider at halftime allowing a pass out for adults.
No.
If you cannot smoke for 3
No.
hours, then you just don't even need to come to the game.
No.
We have no smoke. You can't smoke on your job. There's a lot of jobs you cannot do that. So if you cannot contain yourself for 2.5 hours to watch your kid kick a football or bounce one, then don't come. And I know that sounds really ugly,
I agree.
but we cannot be doing that because people will take advantage of that and you'll be, what you're trying to clean up, you're going to still deal with.
Okay? I'm just gonna say,
Well, and they're not having like.
I'm against it too.
So they still don't be smoking in the parking lot. If they do,
No,
then
I
they
can
still
leave
smoking in
campus.
the park.
I
On
can
your park.
leave campus.
I think clarifying that policy, and honestly, it's just the TCA that's at the end of the policy as it currently sits, and it's really just clarifying that by taking it away.
Yeah.
And it's clear up above that TCA mention, it's pretty clear and explicit above, but just right there.
Are we gonna put it in there or not? I'm sorry, I should look.
Put that in by executive order as well.
Yes.
Well, I think.
Come in.
Yes.
Is that okay, Kathy?
About announcing it, are we gonna put that in the policy?
I don't think we have to.
I don't either.
That's more
Brad.
procedure.
Procedure.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So you are gonna communicate that to all of the, schools, and they're gonna announce it at the football.
And basketball games, even
Yeah.
inside, because a lot of people go outside basketball games and some.
Okay, is there another one? I know,
Tell
Joe,
the
you had
coaches not to
something
be
you wanted to
getting-
bring up.
Yeah.
Joe Smith, you had something you wanted to bring up.
Well, I had gotten I had two calls, as a matter of fact, related to, the new, state absentee policy that I don't know anything about, so I'm gonna learn something here too. But what they were telling me, that is Mr. Young and Miss Penny, Joe, what happens when we have this child that is chronically late? When does being late become an absence that counts towards that mandatory? And then their argument is, if they got kids in elementary school that are starting that pattern of coming to school chronically late, then that's not gonna change. They're gonna carry that into middle school and high school.
The elementary school is a parent problem.
Yeah, it is a parent problem.
That's a parent problem.
A-
High school is
absolutely.
a student problem, and elementary school, I mean, you're looking at two different.
But there ought to be a way, or it would seem to me, it seemed like, I remember years ago that we used to have that. If a child was,
Tardy 3 times, it counts as an absence.
yeah, and if they had so many absences, then they'd file a truancy petition down to juvenile court. I said that on many of those. So,
I've asked Marcia to do some digging around neighboring districts and just see how they address tardy. Most of them, I think, address it through their, ours is called Code of Acceptable Behavior, Code of Conduct, whatever you call it. Marcia, talk about what you found.
Right, so I did look at 6 different districts, and, so just as the superintendent says, the one that actually did address it, it is through, their code of conduct, and, they did, put it in their, tiered process. 5 unexcused tardies is an administrative conference, and that's going with our tiered policy of attendance, and then 7 unexcused, you were referred to the school truancy review board. But basically, the other ones used just what we used. There was a school-based decision in Knox County, parent signs them in, and then a written excuse, and they admit through a school office. It is something that perhaps we can get a committee together and look at, and develop something similar to what they have and using the code of conduct.
So I think our recommendation will be to bring some principals and maybe some truancy officers, social workers together. And Marcia, let's look at if we want to do something systemically, and probably, I think, to the points made earlier, looking by level. So it might be that we approach a little bit different, elementary, middle, and high, because they're just, I'm gonna tell y'all, no, I'm not telling you anything, y'all all raised or will raise kids, and, every level is so different for what you deal with. I hope there's a little bit of leniency for my teenager, because I struggle to get her to bed and get her out in the morning, you know what I mean? And so, but you're exactly right, I mean, you gotta be school on time. And so how do we reemphasize these career skills ultimately with this expectation as a school district? And I think there's a statement to be made in regards to raising the expectation. And I will say this, I know I've been in some opportunities, so I was in one of them a long ago, and talking to a principal who's working really hard, and a mom was bringing the child in at about 9:30, and the school started, maybe later than that, the school started at 8 o'clock. And she told me, she looked at me, she said, that is almost every day. And so, I mean, hour and a half, hour 45 minutes of instruction. And if you've been in elementary schools, you know that morning time is where a lot of that critical work happens. That's where a lot of your literacy block things that are happening during that. So it's something that we need to make sure that we are very clear on, and that our schools are consistent with how we consequence or hold accountable in that regard. So we'll go some time to work on that as a result of this. I appreciate Frank raising that flag as something that we want to address.
That's definitely a parent problem.
Steve, you had transportation.
Yes, Caritcha and I don't know if all of you, I know Caritcha and I got Facebook messages, and we've contacted the person about, and this will be very brief, and I think I sent you, I did a little research. Mary helped me with the National Highway Transportation Board, and I looked up, and it is in school law that students must be seated on the bus when it's moving.
Now, I did follow up on the parent's complaint. I will say that parent has made, the gentleman has made quite a few complaints, about one thing and another. I'm not saying maybe they're all justified, I don't know.
I did go back and look at it.
But I did ask David Eves to look back, and he's gonna pull the tapes and see if that was, the bus driver told him that those kids were in the aisle not when they were moving. So he's gonna pull the tapes to verify that. But when I have a conference call, I get a call at 8:30 this morning and said, Mr. Chairman, and it was Senator Watson, Senator Gardenhire,
Yeah, cause he tagged every single one of them in that post.
Rev. Jeff Conner, they're right, they sent every one of them, and you talk about legislative involvement, and one of the commissioners. And so I told them, and I'm probably the most knowledgeable on school bus safety because I'm certified in 2 states to drive and have kept the license up for it. You go to 2 state safety meetings every year. But 49-6-2116, 3 different sections, say that bus drivers must inform students that they are to be seated, the bus won't move. And what the policy in most systems is, that I've ever been in, and has been here, is if they get up, of course, it is a very great distraction to a driver. And our drivers have enough distractions without children being remiss in their responsibilities. They can get on that mic and say, ladies and gentlemen, you need to be seated immediately and stay there. And if not, I'll have to pull over. They find a safe place, they pull over, and they will have those young people come to the front seat and say, and bus driving, other than special needs, Dr. Bradshaw, correct me if I'm wrong, other than special needs, it is a privilege. If children constantly defy the bus driver and do what they're not supposed to do, then they can, according to the administration, not us, but the administration, they can lose their bus privileges. So if you get a call, Ms. Caritza and I answered the gentleman, and
another mom.
And the mom also, and I answered her too.
My question though is it a matter of the children? I guess I'm not sure if it's a matter of the children being defiant and not sitting down more so than, and I think what drew my eye to it this time, one, I was tagged in 2 different posts, but what drew my concern was that I don't know if this is a district issue, and the reason why I say district issue, not as in Hamilton County, but as in a District 9 issue, and the only reason why I say that is because about 2 weeks ago, one of my Woodmore mothers shared a post from a Brown and Central bus, and it was the same situation. So I'm not sure if there is an issue with that area and maybe the amount of students that are being bused, and if we have, I don't know if do we have enough buses there. I know size is an issue on a bus. I know when I was in high school, I mean, I have cousins and nieces that were like double and triple me when I was in high school. So I mean, I'm just saying, like, when I was in school, we probably could sit 3 to a seat. But now, is that a matter of being comfortably able to sit 3 to a seat, or do we need to look at maybe 2 to a seat? Or if it's middle school, are they 3? I guess I'm just saying, is it? And that's the only reason why it drew my concern today.
Right.
One, it did because of the, like I said, 2 weeks ago when I saw my Woodmore mom posted, it drew my concern, and I did reach out to the administration, and they dealt with that. But then when it came up again, and like I said, I was tagging, and then when I went back to the original post, and I saw that all of our elected officials at the state level had been tagged in the post, I did alert our leadership here because I'm like, we need to do something about this, because for me, this is not twice in the same district. And so I'm just kind of like, and I'm saying that what I'm saying is I don't discredit our departments for doing what they feel is best. I just think that we have to get a handle on it because social media takes on a life of its own, and if we have to be able to address that so that it doesn't take on alternative facts based on true facts.
I agree with you. But one thing, the law says, and Dr. Bradshaw, every state, that the manufacturer has a maximum per bus. And the bus that was in question had a maximum of 60. Now, 3 weeks ago, they had the possibility of a few over 60 being, so they took off, our transportation people, Dr. Bradshaw and Mr. Eves, took off one of the subdivisions. It has, for the last 3 weeks, been under 60. Now, in that 60 bus, correct me if I'm wrong, there are 15 seats on each side.
That's correct.
And so they will have no more than 2 per seat in a high school.
Right, and I mean,
so-
however we're gonna fix it, I just think that we don't wanna.
And when we're having these subdivisions in East Brainerd and some areas, East Brainerd, Ullawas, that are growing so fast, it takes a few weeks sometimes to adjust the buses, which Dr. Bradshaw and Ms. Reed has done as well.
For me though, and I think for everybody that's sitting at this table who experienced bus 366, I don't have a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so.
That's just how I feel about it.
Oh, I was right there
we-
15 minutes after that too, I know.
So, and I'll just bring this up, so this central situation, the central ground, jumped all over it yesterday. Specifically what transpired is, a football team, no practice, it rained, so they went home. So, the kids get on the bus, and now you've got a whole different influx of kids that haven't rode the bus the whole year. And so literally David Eves, Ken, whoever on the team, they go on the ground and actually they can count how many kids are getting on the bus. So we'll continue to level, as we go forward. We double checked, bus 8 is the exact number this year, yesterday's bus. Double check bus 8, it's at or under 60, and we just continue to level. We encourage our parents, if you have an issue, reach out to us. You know, I know unfortunately in this day and age, first place folks go is to, social media or whatever, and 9 out of 10 times, we're able to jump on it and fix it, and our transportation folks and a team are so responsive. Operations folks as a whole try to be so responsive, to the needs, so we'll continue to navigate it. I think, I don't think, David Eves, we were sending out a message, sending this to all bus drivers, following it up again in the morning, all bus drivers, make sure your children, your students on their bus are seated, as they come in, and continue to navigate in that way, so, try to jump on it.
Real quick, we talked also about behavior on the bus. We don't have a clear, so I don't know if we need a policy, or we just need to make sure the procedures are known. I know the rules of conduct for students riding a bus. About the first referral, second referral, third referral, fourth referral, fifth. We need to be a little bit more clear with parents about that, make sure they understand. Also, parents need to understand if they ever get on a bus and threaten the bus driver, you have crossed over into criminal activity. That cannot happen, and we have had that to happen, and I just think parents need to be very much aware, and students need to be very much aware that they're expected to behave on the bus just like in the classroom. And our bus drivers are having to put up with some things they should not have to put up with. And to Clarissa's point, we just cannot continue to wait on some of this behavior, but safety issues are paramount. And I don't know whether this needs to be a policy, procedure, how we need to handle this, but we need to be more clear with the parents about the behavior of their students on buses, that we do not have to let them ride.
Privilege.
And we certainly don't
How are the bus monitors? Do we have bus monitors?
Next week, and I know that, you want to talk about the code,
Yes.
we're gonna give an ops update, in addition, go ahead.
Bus monitors, we are working closely with the learning community, the opportunity zone, where we have identified about 6 to 7 bus monitors that will support those schools. Due to funding, we can't have a monitor for the entire district, every bus, but we're starting there as a pilot. So we're looking at next week implementing that.
Thank you. I believe we're gonna have to cut it off to get, but thank you so much. Visitors, thank you for.
Real quickly, so the policies that we're gonna vote on at our meeting are, 1.501 visitors to schools, the tobacco,
It's 1 point.
the school calendar 1.800, and the tobacco 1.803. Is there another one that you feel like is?
By executive request, we're gonna make a vote on
Is
the
there
first
another
reading.
one that you, by executive
Another one, okay.
request, would like to vote
No,
on?
I would ask, and Scott can chime in on this, are we able to make suggested edits for first read, not executive order for first read, and have a month of the board still been able to review to finalize it in October?
Your board policy says that you can adopt something on the first read. It's just an operating procedure that this board has said, you know what, maybe it's better for us to digest. So really, it boils down to the executive committee sets the agenda, but any two board members can ask for something to be put on there.
So I guess what I would ask is if we could make these changes absent those 3 policies or so that was executive order and put them on the agenda for first read next week.
Yeah.
And then the board's got a month to review, then we'll have a second read in October.
That's good.
So we're just gonna go ahead and take the entire sheet
Correct.
and update them, and only 3 of them
Will be for.
will be
vote.
for.
We'll be on voting first
The
reading.
others will have a month to
Okay.
review and everything
We'll
else.
do that, so.
Okay.
So,
And
Nikki,
then I think,
I'm sorry, if you put those 3 with a separate memo,
Absolutely,
so,
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
so, yeah, eliminates confusion for me, thank you.
What about the ones that you have question about, or we?
that's what I was gonna ask.
Yes,
So what do we do about those?
So the next policy meeting,
Yes.
we'll bring those
Yes.
forward and
Yes.
the additional,
yes.
so we'll finish up section
We can
1
attach
and the
any-
additional.
Yeah. Thank you.
Visitors, thank you for coming. We're going to an executive session.
Let's take about 5 minutes.
Take about a 5-minute break and go to executive session.